Yeah, but he's getting it back. I was like, really? Should have known.
Okay.
Hold on just a second. Let me
Sure.
turn this off. Stupid phone. Do it on the side. There we go. Okay, thanks.
Sure. Well, thank you guys for being here. We're just, you know, as a family, we wanted to address a few questions that we have that are unanswered. We believe those are questions that the public should know and needs to know in making an informed decision and voting next week. And so we have an open letter to Sheriff Parkinson. And we're hoping that the sheriff will provide some responses to questions which have not been answered or have not been answered accurately or appropriately since Andrew's death. And so with that, I'll go ahead and just read the letter that we're submitting to the sheriff. Dear Sheriff Parkinson, on Saturday, May 25th, 2018, we scattered Andrew's ashes at sea on what would have been his 38th birthday. It's been nearly a year and a half since Andrew died in the jail that you command, and we still do not have answers to some of the most troubling questions. You have publicly stated numerous times that Andrew was not released from the restraint chair because he was combative, he would not accept medications, and that jail staff could not involuntarily medicate him. The video of Andrew's time in the restraint chair definitively shows that Andrew was never outwardly aggressive or combative with jail staff. The limited records which do exist, as well as the video, show that Andrew did in fact receive a sedative injection approximately 90 minutes after being placed in the restraint chair. Thereafter, he is variously described as either calm or responding appropriately to questions. Additionally, the video evidence clearly shows that Andrew was not afforded any opportunity to use the restroom in violation of Sheriff's Custody Policy 523. That Andrew never received appropriate or policy-compliant range of motion exercises, also in violation of Sheriff's Custody Policy 523. And that Andrew was held in the restraint chair for a period of time that greatly exceeded that which was necessary to control his behavior, and that is also in violation of Sheriff's Custody Policy 523. You have publicly stated numerous times that jail custody staff appropriately followed all policies and procedures. This does not appear to be a true or accurate statement. Based on the facts known today, several fundamental questions are raised that demand an honest and credible answer. We believe that not only are we entitled to these answers as a family, we believe that it's not reasonable or appropriate to ask the electorate to go to the polls without answers to some of these fundamental questions. These issues speak directly to your veracity, your honesty, your willingness and ability to address the very serious challenges of overseeing the San Luis Obispo County Jail. With that, these are our questions. If Andrew was not combative with staff and accepted sedative medications, why was he kept in the restraint chair for over 46 hours? Given his lack of combativeness and his sedation, the prospect is now raised that his continued restraint was the product of utter indifference, or that he was kept restrained as retaliation or punishment by custody staff. Do you now acknowledge that custody staff did not follow the relevant and applicable policies concerning restraint, particularly Sheriff's Custody Policy 523 concerning the use of restraints? Or do you continue to maintain that your staff followed all policies and procedures appropriately? Third, Given the implication has been raised that Andrew's time in the restraint chair was punishment or retaliation, and that jail custody staff were not following restraint policy, what are we to infer from the fact that the correctional sergeant who ordered Andrew into the restraint chair and the correctional lieutenant who was notified of this action and approved it, and that is on Friday, January 20th, both have since been promoted to correctional lieutenant and correctional captain, respectively? Is there an explanation which you can provide for why the staff members responsible for these horrendous actions have not been disciplined and instead appear to have been rewarded for what can be either fatal errors in judgment at best or malicious intent at worst? Mr. Parkinson, you are claiming to be the person who can bring the sheriff's department and the SLO County Jail out of the darkness in which it sits. If that is true, you should be willing and able to give the voters and citizens of this county, as well as our family, honest answers to these questions. We look forward to a candid and definitive response, and we look forward to getting that response before Tuesday. That is what we want to ask the sheriff. This is what we are hoping the sheriff will provide a response to. These are questions that remain unanswered, and we believe they go to the heart of questions about what exactly is the problem at the SLO County Jail. What is the cultural problem that exists? Is the sheriff willing and able to actually hold the people that he oversees accountable for what happened? And is he willing to be honest about what happened? At this point, we do not feel that has happened. We don't feel that the sheriff has provided honest or credible answers to most of these fundamental questions. And so with that, if anybody has any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Yeah, I guess, just the first question I had is, why do you think it's important for these questions to be answered before the election? And why specifically do you think these questions and the answers to them are important to people who are going to be voting on election day?
Sure. I think that, again, these questions speak directly to Mr. Parkinson's veracity, his honesty. They also speak directly to whether or not he is able and willing to take remedial measures where needed. So if you are unwilling to be honest about what the problem is, okay, if Andrew was sedated and he was not combative, there is no reason to continue to hold him in the chair. And yet somebody was coming in and addressing Andrew, taking and unstrapping an arm or a limb for range of motion exercises approximately every 1 to 3 hours. They had to have known that he wasn't acting combatively. It really does raise only two other possibilities. The possibilities are that there was utter indifference to the fact that he was in the chair, or that it was actually intended as punishment. And in either of those scenarios, it says something about the sheriff's leadership that he has not been able to take and discipline somebody who engaged in that behavior. Let's put aside for a minute any questions of what he knew or when he knew it. The staff knew. And if he's unwilling to hold those people responsible, how could we ever expect any meaningful change to occur at that jail?
And that's what you're hoping, that people will take to the polls?
I'm hoping that people will make a decision based on the totality of the evidence and the totality of the facts as they know them, and these are facts that are unknown, and they really do tell us a lot about whether the sheriff is, at this point, willing to be honest about what happened, willing to be forthcoming with the public, His previous statements frequently have turned out to be incorrect, false, or even, in my opinion, outright lie.
I'd like to just add too, I think when Ian Parkinson was holding town hall meetings and discussing the fact that they did everything that they could in their power. They only had so much legal right to. They couldn't sedate Andrew. They were waiting for the mental health department to open up and bring him, and basically he acted like his hands were tied. And what we are now, and I think the public, because he's been successful in other areas as being a sheriff, have accepted that response as being something that, well, he did the best he could. And we see that this question here is stating that that's not true. And as a family, we've experienced from the time that my brother died, we've experienced a cover-up, and we've had to go through and investigate what's really gone on. And from a leader that is an elected official that can't be fired and has as much power as he has, we feel like it's important for the general public to understand the rhetoric that he told them as to why Andrew was held there for so long is now untrue based off of video and medical record evidence. And we think that's very important for the public to know going forward in voting.
We also believe that it really is troubling that the person who made the decision, and we are leaving their names out because we don't think it's helpful particularly to name those people, but there is a correctional sergeant that made the decision to put Andrew in that chair. There was a correctional lieutenant overseeing that jail who approved that action. They were there for hours and hours and hours, and yet Andrew still stayed in the chair. Those people have been promoted. They have been promoted. So it is hard to see that as anything other than the sheriff sort of co-opting them by promotion in order to secure their compliance and support.
Can you tell us how you know they've been promoted?
I cannot tell you without betraying a confidence. There are people that speak to us who work at the county, that work in different departments in the county, I'll just say, and they do sometimes come forward, usually out of because their conscience is bothering them, but universally they all cite fear of retaliation and have asked not to be publicly named. But I don't think that there is any dispute that those promotions occurred.
So the officers who were promoted, they made the call to put Andrew in the restraint chair. Through the shift changes and everything, were they there later knowing that he was still in the chair 46 hours later?
There is one correctional sergeant, not the sergeant who ordered him into the chair, who is there on Friday. It looks like that person is probably ending their shift right around the time Andrew is getting placed in the chair. And then they are back for on Saturday, and I believe the shift was starting at about 7 p.m. and went through to probably 7 a.m. And so at bare minimum, I believe that correctional sergeant would have had to have known. But if they were actually following the policies, the correctional sergeant is the watch commander or the facility manager while there. And to continue to hold someone in those kind of restraints would require their assent. And so there's really no way to go in and do that, an 8 or 12 hour shift as a correctional sergeant without being aware and agreeing to continue that process. So it's very hard to see this as anything other than somebody made a decision that Andrew was going to stay in that chair, and he was going to stay there for a very long time, and that is essentially, it is punishment. It is punishment for being mentally ill. It is punishment because we are tired of dealing with you being mentally ill. And so we're going to stick you in this chair until you stop being mentally ill. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I think it's an act of frustration, anger, and retaliation.
And during the time when Andrew was in the jail before he died, did he or any of the jail staff that any of you ever interacted with express any kind of frustration like that, or give any hint that that might be a possibility, that they had grown frustrated with him, or possibly might be doing something out of punishment or retaliation versus following the protocol for that type of stuff?
I don't know of any specific instance where punishment was threatened in words. Andrew had an undifferentiated type of schizophrenia. He suffered from delusions, command hallucinations, and other forms of symptoms that alter reality, and alter reality for him. So he frequently felt scared, threatened, and had a very, when unmedicated, contentious relationship with the guards. When medicated, they seem to have gotten on fairly well. I don't know of any guard threatening. I will say that putting him in solitary confinement for the lengths of time that he was put in, he was in solitary confinement for much of the preceding 14 months. And that is that is punishment, because you are using solitary confinement as a substitute for treatment. And there is no way to see that other than punishment.
You know, I will say that my wife and I used all of our visitation rights every week to see Andrew. And so we got to see the level of stress that he was living under. Now, whether that was because of 14 months of isolation, I don't know about you, but if you put me in an isolated situation for 2 months, I would be crazy. He did it for 14 months. We saw the stress all over. We also saw the custodial staff when they brought him in and then took him out. And there is a level of concern that we have on how they're just treating him humanitarily as just a person. It's almost like, well, here's your animal, have your time, and we'll take him back to his cell. So obviously we can't see what the custodial staff does behind those walls, but we have known our son for 36 and a half years and know how to read him, and he was under a high level of stress the entire time he was in there. And we had interaction with the guards. Many times we would go in there and they would treat us as if we had committed a crime. We were there to see our son and support him, which in turn would support them to bring his elevated state of agitation down. So no, we weren't privy to go behind the bars, but we did read the signs.
And I will also say, I spoke to Andrew on the phone. I was the last family member and last person from the outside to speak to him. He had called, and in hindsight now, I remember it as being unusual because he had a heightened sense of fear and tension in his voice. And it's the only time I ever remember. I used to speak to him a lot on the phone, and we would have lengthy conversation because we had the time. The only time I ever remember him having to get off the phone in a hurry without being able to say goodbye. And I look back at that, and it, I don't know what I can glean from it other than that he was fearful, and I don't know what was going on there, but it was an unusual conversation, and there was fear.
Can we talk a little bit about policy 523? This is the policy we believe was in effect during Andrew's restraint time.
Yes.
What is the particular issue you have with the policy and not being followed?
Yeah, so the policy, I think it's definitive that it wasn't followed, in the sense that, let's just address maybe some of the low-hanging fruit. That is a policy that, that requires, among other things, that, he be accommodated to go to the restroom every 2 hours, okay? That's not just something we do out of basic humanity. If you're in a restraint chair, it's important to get up and move. And so denying him any ability to use the restroom or to accommodate that, it doesn't just implicate his dignity, which it very, very much does, but it also made a bad situation worse by making it more likely that he would develop a blood clot. And so when you take that, and combine it, and I'm sorry, just to follow up, that is 523.7. Provisions shall be made to accommodate any toileting needs at least once every 2 hours. Andrew died of a pulmonary embolism that was a product of deep vein thrombosis, a blood clot growing in his leg, which breaks free and goes and cuts off oxygen to the lungs. Because that risk exists with the restraint chair, you have range of motion exercises that are supposed to occur. They're supposed to occur every 2 hours. They are supposed to occur for 10 minutes. I'm reading again from the policy. Range of motion exercise will consist of alternate movement of the extremities, i.e. right arm and left arm, for a minimum of 10 minutes every 2 hours. That standard was not met one single time. Custody staff performed range of motion exercises on Andrew, and they did so with varying degrees of sometimes it was 2 hours. Sometimes it was less than 2 hours. Sometimes it was more. I think the longest that I know of was about, I think, a 4-hour window or over a 4-hour window that he went without a range of motion exercise. But there wasn't a single time that any of those range of motion exercises happened where they actually exercised his limb for 10 minutes. That policy that is meant to be protective of the life of the person wasn't followed. So while they've got him in an objectively dangerous situation, the basic precautions that are in place in order to try to keep that person from harm are not being followed. And it baffles me to this day that still the sheriff goes out and says that they have absolutely, he has said unequivocally that they followed all policies. He has spoke directly to the range of motion. It was on Dave Congleton. He got a question. He answered it. He said definitively, they provided these exercises according to policy. And it is simply not true. It is not true a single time. My notes after reviewing the video are that 4 hours and 10 minutes was the longest period in between range of motion exercises. That the shortest occurred for about 1 minute and 30 seconds, so 90 seconds, compared to a requirement of 10 minutes. That on the highest end, it was about 6 minutes and 45 seconds. And on average, it was about 3 minutes and 46 seconds. 3 minutes and 46 seconds was the average for a policy that requires range of motion for 10 minutes. That is falling dramatically short of what is required by policy. Specifically to prevent the exact harm that he suffered and which killed him. That policy is meant to increase circulation, get your arms moving, get your legs moving. And, you know, it's important to understand that this is a standard which has a hard sort of goal, right? There's a 10-minute standard there every 2 hours. So this is something we can say definitively didn't happen because we have video evidence of that. But it doesn't say anything about the qualitative nature. And so there is a qualitative side as well. It is more subjective, but that qualitative side shows us that those range of motion exercises that were happening seem to be happening more by rote. They don't seem to be meaningfully trying to get his arms up above his head in the way that a range of motion exercise should be done in order to prevent the harm. It looks like what is happening is that they are doing it for the benefit of saying we did it, not for the benefit of actually trying to reduce harm.
Yeah, we would also like the community to know that, especially coming up to this election, that, you know, the sheriff's department at its core should uphold values of integrity and transparency and honesty. And here we have the current sheriff, Ian Parkinson, who is under FBI investigation for the wrongful death of several inmates under his care. And he covered it up. This is going to come to light through this FBI investigation, and he may and should be indicted for it. And when that happens, it's going to leave this community in a very tough position because they will no longer have a sheriff. And it's also going to show the community, I mean, what are we showing our children, the next generation, that, you know, someone in a position of power and you know, someone we've elected, it's okay for them to lie and to cover up. It's not the message we want to send. And we want the public to be aware that this is a real possibility through this FBI investigation that he will be indicted.
And just to follow up on that, there's part of what we're saying here is, look, if he was willing to be medicated, if he accepted medications, he received a sedative injection, he wasn't being combative. There are very, very tough questions about then why was he kept in that chair. Those things implicate criminal activity, okay? So that means that because of the actions of these staff members at the jail, we are now looking at a situation that cannot be explained by he wouldn't take medicine. It cannot be explained by, you know, some claim that he is acting like a wild animal. He is not. And so that implicates a homicide. This is the death of a human by the actions of other humans. That is a very serious matter. And so the fact that the people most directly involved would be promoted is shocking, to say the least. But what this really says is that the sheriff's department is above the law, and they consider themselves above the law. This is criminal activity. And Tyler is correct. There is an FBI investigation that is pending. We don't get to know what the FBI is doing, but Sheriff Parkinson is putting the county in a position by simply running for re-election that should he be re-elected, there is a possibility of him being removed from office. This is a criminal investigation. It is a criminal investigation into violations of civil rights, but that does not take away the fact that it is still a criminal investigation. And that is truly troubling, because if he were removed from office because he was indicted, arrested, we would have, the people of San Luis County would not have had the opportunity to choose their sheriff. It will be chosen for us.
I will say that something to that, though. I can understand why if Ian Parkinson had been honest throughout this and he was being investigated, it's an investigation, it's before he's been convicted, so I can see him saying, no, I'm going to run. What was very hard for me was when he said he invited the FBI in to investigate him. We had sat down, my parents had sat down with them a month before talking to them, and they were very clear to my parents, you will not be happy about how long this takes. They're very thorough, they take a long time. They were investigating him before he said he invited them. I have a hard time with that. Now, if he really feels like he has done nothing wrong, they have followed protocol, he's got a tough job, and he's dealing with tough people in there, then by all means, move forward. But we have seen cover up over cover up, and it's hard for us because we've lost a loved one. And so it almost could be like revenge. We feel like people need to know what we've learned. And part of also what I'd like to look at as protocol that we didn't name in here is when they did remove my brother from the chair, they put him in the next cell and just dropped him on the ground. I would think that there was some protocol that when somebody's been in a chair that long, they do not go into the neighboring cell. They go immediately to a medical place inside the jail to be inspected to see how they're doing. It almost feels like they dropped him in there because the mess had gotten so bad with the urine and the feces that they needed to clean it, but they weren't looking to really release him, because had they wanted to release him, there should have been a protocol to take him immediately to a doctor to be inspected to see if he could be released. So there's issues that we see in that video where they drop him in there. They leave him in there. There's people looking through, and he's having these issues where protocol seems like if you've left somebody in a chair for 2 days straight, you take him immediately to a doctor to see how he's doing. That didn't happen. So
yeah, and I think I would agree and say that there are some very troubling aspects of just exactly what did happen.
yeah.
What you don't see is behavior that seems to be consistent with an intention to have permanently released him from the chair, that they actually made this decision, because he is taken from one sobering cell and put directly in the cell next to it, somewhat unceremoniously dropped there and left to fend for himself. He is not taken to be medically checked. He is not taken to get cleaned up. This is a man who has been sitting in his own urine and feces for 2 days.
They never took him and gave him a shower afterwards.
They didn't move to clean him up, but they did move immediately to clean the cell, which is troubling. What's even more troubling is that we, in leading up to the settlement and investigating the case, we spoke with the inmate who was cleaning that cell, and unequivocally they said the intention was to put him back in, and that's why the cell was being cleaned. When we look at just the objective evidence from the video, it is very hard to say that we can see any kind of indication that they intend to remove him permanently. You don't see the normal things happening.
You know, and we're talking about the death of a family member, which is very hard for us, but Andrew's death just brings up, it was just an opening to a discourse on what's really going on with the Sheriff's Department and some of the bigger issues at hand here. And that is, you know, the Sheriff's Department, you know, as I said earlier, has these core values of honesty and veracity and transparency. If you cannot trust your own sheriff, who can you trust? I mean, that is the core issue here, especially coming up to this election, is you have, the people here have an opportunity to vote, and they can either vote for someone who has shown that that he cannot be trusted, that he is not beyond covering up and protecting and serving his own value or his own job, but not the people he was elected to protect and serve. And so you have, you know, Clayton running And although he may not be as polished or, the PR person that Sheriff Parkinson is, he can stand up to those values and bring back to this community what they desperately need, and that's a sheriff's department that they can trust. We cannot trust the sheriff's department we have now.
We're here today because Sheriff Parkinson has been lying and covering up since Andrew's death. Had we not gotten a second opinion on the autopsy, nobody would even know about this. So we've had experts, we paid experts that are renowned in their field throughout the world that without a doubt he did not follow policy. So I just say, to understand the present, you need to look at the past. The past being his first statements and his press statement to us was, was a natural death first, and I followed all policy and procedures. So we've had a year and a half to look into this now. And it's kind of is amazing to me that the public, well, I get it, we're so involved in this, but we've disclosed these lies and these cover-ups, and we've done it with professionals. And all of the things that Ian Parkinson is now talking about that he's putting into place, those were things that our professionals brought to the table. And he's acting as if ever since this happened, I'm putting all, I've come up with all these programs. That's not the case.
They turned that off.
That's not the case. So from the beginning, like a little boy, Ian Parkinson has hid behind Rita Neal, County Council. He's hidden behind Dan Dow, to a large extent, the Board of Supervisors. And a year and a half ago, I was calling for his resignation to be a man and stand up. I mean, just be a man and stand up. Now he's acting like a little boy, hiding behind, for whatever reason they're protecting him. But the fact of the matter is that this man is all hat and no cowboy. I mean, it's ridiculous that we're even sitting here talking about the possible re-election of a man that is not transparent at all with the public, and he certainly hasn't been with us.
And I do believe that we're dealing with a terrible case of cronyism in our county that we don't want to look at. There is a need for law enforcement to support law enforcement, whether they are right or wrong. And we need to be very careful, because that leads to harm not just for the indigent, which it definitely does, and those without recourse, but eventually that leads to a bad outcome for all citizens. Cronyism can't be something that we, the old boys club, they call it. Well, there's girls involved too, but law enforcement must be held by the sheriff to a higher standard. And I just want to see that done so that your children are safe, my children are safe, people without any backing, without family members that are poor, that when the law enforcement steps out of line, someone's there to say, this isn't right for you either. We need to do what's right. And if we continue to elect people that simply are good at functions and look good and are happy and are very powerful and make us afraid, we're all in trouble. And that's why we're here today, because we care about this community. We aren't here to save ourselves. The worst has been done to us. It has not been done to the rest of this county, not yet. But that is our fear, that if we continue this line of thinking and expectation, that we are going to end up with even a bigger mess than just torture and death.
And there is something that is important to recognize, which is as much as people probably look at it and go, well, I won't end up in jail. We can all end up in jail. Everybody is one traffic stop and a miscommunication with an officer away from potentially being in jail, even for a short period of time. Perfectly innocent, honest people end up in jail for all sorts of reasons. And this does go beyond the mentally ill. There is a culture at the jail. There is a culture of abuse. There is a culture of indifference. And it is particularly hard on the mentally ill, but it is hard on anyone who is in there. And all of us can, at some point in our lives, end up in there. And so, or a loved one. It does concern us all. Andrew's case is an extreme example, and it has served as a catalyst to show us just how broken our county government is. We have seen unprecedented levels of suppression of public information. I've been a lawyer in San Luis County for 10 years. I've grown up here. I have never seen this level of informational control, of information that the public has a right to, that has happened in conjunction with Andrew's case. It shows to me definitively that the county is in an extremely bad spot. The county is not functioning to serve the citizens right now. It is functioning to serve itself, much like a corporation who over time is not so much serving their shareholders as they are serving their own interests. This is what the county has become right now, and it really does have to stop. There has to be a point at which it returns to the people.
How does the family react to people who support Sheriff Parkinson, who say he wasn't there, he didn't know, he's put into effect sweeping changes at the jail, there's been a settlement made? You know, how does the family respond to those facts that he...
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
First of all, Andrew died in, what was it, the 7th year of Mr. Parkinson's tenure. But what happened in that prior 7 years? What happened was the mentality that created the situation for Andrew. But now that his feet are to the fire and he's been given a list of changes that professionals have said, this is what was wrong with your jail and this is what needs to be done. Now he's incorporating them as if they're his ideas. But why didn't he do that 7 years ago?
We don't have any legal way of proving this because it was written on a piece of paper by county council. But we came to that settlement agreement saying money is not what we're after. In fact, you don't have enough money. We tomorrow could go to the federal court. We could make $20 million off of this. We don't want to put the county in that position. That isn't our goal here. Our goal is to see that this never happens to anyone else. We came with a set of really conditions to say this has to happen at that jail before we'll ever settle on anything. And they agreed to them. They wrote them down. It was separate from our agreement. But she wrote them down on a piece of paper and said, I will make sure that these happen myself. And now we listen to Sheriff Parkinson on the news and watch him talk about all the things he's done. He had no intention and had never planned to do any of those things until this happened. And that, too, is a form of lying. He never came to us and said, look, this happened, it was wrong, let's change it. We would have worked right alongside him. We weren't after anybody's head. We simply need to have something that actually is true and works. And it's not the sheriff providing that.
What were some of those?
Yes. One was we said immediately the chair has to be gone. It took a long time for that chair to actually be gone, and it only happened after we discovered, our investigators discovered it had been put together incorrectly and that the legs were not right. At that point, they didn't just get it gone, they destroyed it.
You could say that was destroying evidence.
We asked for there to be oversight, a warden, someone that would take the place who could really do a good job there, because obviously the sheriff was too busy. He was not paying attention. Even in his own statements, he has said, I knew nothing about this. If a sheriff doesn't know what's going on in his jail, get somebody that does. Get somebody with power that knows what's happening so that it can be taken care of. We asked
for specific time limits on isolation. That's one of the things he's talking about that he did. We asked for...
Which never was actually put into force, because our specialists went in afterwards and they found a man in isolation again. He'd been there for a week, and their reasoning was, he doesn't get us and we don't get him. That was their response.
Right.
And this was after Andrew, and this was after we'd made the conditions. And
we asked for a separation of the coroner's office and the sheriff's office. We asked for a chief medical officer. We asked for the warden. You mentioned that. We asked for training for the staff.
A much better training, and they included a few hours. That's not enough. We asked for comprehensive training so that the people that are actually suffering too, which are the guards, these people don't have oversight. Well, if you're left on your own in a jail, there's going to be a degradation of your own ability to know what's right and wrong, unless you have good leadership. They didn't have good leadership.
And just to follow up a little bit, Karina, with your question, look, anything that is improving the conditions out there is a good thing.
Yes.
And whether or not, the sheriff is doing them because he wants to be reelected, or he's doing them out of a genuine sense of public good, we'll take them anyway. Absolutely. We can get them. But what I do remain deeply concerned about is the part that is not being addressed. There is in my opinion, a overemphasis on changes to policy when we know definitively that the policy wasn't being followed in the first place. And what that says to us is that there is a cultural problem at the jail. I do not see a lot of things that are addressed to deal with that problem, that are addressing that problem. And this is why we specifically raise, it's not our intention to sit here and call out individual guards, but it does tie into this idea that, look, are we actually dealing with the cultural problem? Because when we see that the people most directly involved have been promoted, it strongly suggests that that is not happening, that jail is not receiving the sort of jolt to the system that needs to happen in order to change what is a mentality that I'm sure grew over time. There are lots of good people that work out there. There are probably some who shouldn't be working out there, but there are lots of good people. It's a hard job.
Yeah.
It's an unbelievably hard job. They go to jail every day themselves. But that being said, there are, at bare minimum, we expect policies and protocols to be followed. We expect that the culture of the jail will not be one of such indifference or even cruelty that this type of thing could happen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if policy and procedure were followed, our brother would be alive today. I have no doubt about that. It's not a policy procedure issue. It needs to probably start there in hopes that it will change the mentality. But, you know, you have a sheriff that says, oh, I wasn't there, I wasn't aware. Well, he did say he was aware initially, but then he's taken that back. That is your jail. You run that jail. You need to be aware of these things. And when you became aware of them, what happened? What was anyone reprimanded? No. You allowed it to happen. What kind of message does that send the people that work for you and your employees? That it's okay to do that. You do not need to follow those policy and procedures. I've got your back.
But it is. That is a behavioral reinforcement of... It's behaviorally reinforcing that there will not be consequences for that kind of behavior. And that is not consistent with an intention and a genuine desire to change what is actually wrong within the jail and within the sheriff's department.
You know, and back to your question, Karina, about how we respond to people that still hear this and you know, want to support Ian. I feel like I can be sympathetic in a sense in that they haven't gone through and experienced everything that we've done. I think Ian Parkinson has done good jobs in other areas as being a sheriff. So, and so I understand that he is charismatic. He goes to the women's shelter. He's out there. He is a likable guy, and so I understand. You know, I was at a baseball game up in the stands, and I heard a gentleman joke, "Oh, you know, you better not do something. Ian will throw you in the chair." And I thought, I wonder if that was a bad statement or, you know, where they're going. And they started laughing. He goes, "Can you believe that? They're trying to, you know, act like he had any responsibility with the death of Andrew." And, you know, I just kind of tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Hey, you know, that was actually my brother, and I'd love to tell you a little bit more." And that's been kind of the battle that we've been going through. And once I got done telling him, he goes, "I had no idea." And I think that's part of why we want to be here to talk about it, is we've experienced a lot. As hard as just the loss of a brother, but also everything that we have found out in this, and a lot of people don't know it, and so it's not really fair for us to get too upset with it. But I can understand it a little bit. But I feel like if they knew everything that we knew and have gone through, they would feel differently.
And also, I can't blame certain people. I feel bad. I have seen leaders in the community and community members that I know, that I have a lot of respect for. I have seen them come out and make public statements in defense of Sheriff Parkinson based on inaccurate, factually wrong information. And I feel somewhat bad for those people. I feel like there's a degree to which he is using members of the community to sort of bolster what are demonstrably false claims. We see letters to the editor talking about all you can expect is that they follow policy. They did that. What else can you expect from them? But it isn't true. No part of it is true. And if you're the person writing that letter, or you're the person writing the letter that says, what else could they do if he wouldn't accept medication? When these things turn out to be utterly false, how do those people feel? I feel bad for them. I feel that, you know, he puts them in an incredibly hard position. But, you know, it's an election. We understand that people have differing views. We are simply trying to get as much information out there about what occurred so that people can make an informed decision. There are people who are going to say, I don't care how many people died at the jail. There are people out there who will say, that's one less taxpayer, or one less burden on the taxpayers. And I understand. It is their right to feel that way and vote accordingly. But for those who don't feel that way, we want to get the information, the relevant information out. And we think that in particular, the questions we are asking today are the ones that speak most directly to what is happening, what parts of the sheriff's qualifications are implicated by it, and that's why we're hoping that finally, after a year, almost a year and a half, we might also as a family have some answers to this. So.
And I think they know, the county knows, that this is a lot worse than they would like it to be portrayed, or they wouldn't have hired a PR firm with the taxpayers' money to come in during an election period to make it look okay. They know it's not okay. They know nothing about this is okay. They know that the sheriff is not okay. To the extent of $20,000, they know that. And that spoke volumes to us that our county would actually hire people, a PR firm, to provide the sheriff with some kind of a platform that he could use that was conscionable. And it's not conscionable.
And it's indicative of the problem. This is what happens when there must be a base level of trust between law enforcement and the public. It is the cornerstone of the entire relationship. And there is a well-paid position in the sheriff's office that is a public information officer. That position exists, but that person could not perform that function because their credibility was gone. And it's gone because of the information they put out the day after Andrew died, which turned out to be utterly misleading or outright false. And so now that person that taxpayers pay a good salary to can't act in that position because they no longer have credibility. And so then you're in a situation where you have to start bringing in outside people who you hope can provide credibility. This is an untenable situation. The trust has to be restored between law enforcement and the community. It just has to.
I think, too, what's interesting about this election right now is you do have Clayton that doesn't have experience being a sheriff, and the sheriff doesn't just deal with the jail. So there's other areas that I think people are concerned about. But I'm reminded that Ian didn't have experience 11 years ago either, and
8 years ago.
Or eight years ago, yeah, in 2011. Sorry, and just as, you know, to piggyback off of Tave, that trust issue, if there's one area that he's willing to cover up, how can we ever believe that what he's telling us in other areas? And we have a gentleman now that has a college degree, worked in the police department. When he was there, he was the top of his class, and he did have to retire due to an injury, early retirement, but he didn't stop working. He continued to work in the private field, which I love. And he's looking to not act like he's someone else. He's going to get people that know how to run a jail and run that. And he's going to be over it all. He doesn't need to be the one out on the streets throwing people in the car. There's police officers for that.
He's a hardworking guy who simply wants to do the hard work because it's required. Yeah, absolutely.
Just a side note about the qualifications. We're concerned, as Tave and all of us had said, a mentality that's in the jail. And, Mr. Parkinson touts his experience as I went into law enforcement when I was 19 years old. And that's all Mr. Parkinson has known. Well, I went into the service when I was 18 years old. I was just a punk kid. And, within 6 months, I was willing to kill somebody. That's the way they trained you. Because the military has that mentality, they train soldiers. Well, Ian has, from a very impressionable age, and believe me, I was impressionable or I wouldn't have been so easily brainwashed for that. Ian has grown up with the mentality that we're dealing with today. And so when you say, well, at 19, I went into law enforcement, I say that is actually disqualifies you, in my mind, with what we're dealing with presently in our jail. Mr. Clayton has had varied experiences. He's an educated man. He's a courageous man. Anybody to go up against Sheriff Parkinson has to have courage because he's such a powerful figure here. And he is a man of character. So we want a mentality change in the jail. And his multiple years in law enforcement, to me, is detrimental.
The only final note I would say is that to the extent people find it concerning that Mr. Clayton might not be able to learn on the job certain things that he might need to, I find that to be a lot more of a much more likely and plausible situation that Mr. Clayton is perfectly qualified and intelligent. I do find it to be a lot less likely that Sheriff Parkinson is going to suddenly learn to be transparent and accountable. Yeah. With that, if there are any other questions, sorry for talking your ears off, guys.
Yeah, try to edit that.
So, this is called the Group Therapy with the Holland Family.